Good day, everyone. My name is Jaynine McCrae, and I'll be your host for July's NCTR Dialogue of 2021. I'm originally from Kugluktuk, Nunavut. My family has been living in the South since I was 2 years old, and I've recently started a federal not-for-profit called Inuit Community Development and Education Foundation. We are based in Edmonton, and we hope to establish a center for Inuit who are living in the greater Edmonton metropolitan region. Our focus is on reclaiming and revitalizing Inuit culture and traditions. The NCTR Dialogue Series began in the summer of 2020 to continue the center's work of spreading awareness and educating the public in a virtual format. Starting in June of last year, 3 NCTR dialogues were held to discuss topics such as the LGBTQ2 spirit perspectives on the calls to action, Indigenous youth perspectives of the calls to action, and working alongside Indigenous communities. During today's dialogue, we will be exploring the experiences, challenges, and adaptations that urban Inuit navigate in Southern Canada. We will also touch on how to keep connected with culture and conclude with how Southern communities can better support our Northern relatives. Today, we are joined by 3 incredible voices: Nikki Komaksiutiksak, Lynda Brown, and Heidi Langell. I'll now invite Nikki to introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nikki Komaksiutiksak. I'm originally from Chesterfield in Nunavut, but Winnipeg has been my home for almost 30 years now. I'm a mother of 5. And also the new executive director for a newly formed organization called Tungasugit Inuit Resource Center. It's the first Inuit Resource Center in Western Canada. We've been open for 2 years now. And I'm also a well-known throat singer, solo throat singer. It's hard in Winnipeg sometimes to find a partner. So a lot of times when I want to showcase a part of who I am and where I come from, I often throat sing alone. Yeah, that's a little bit about me. Jay.
Thank you, Nikki, for being a part of today's discussion. I'll now ask Lynda Brown to please introduce yourself.
Hi to meet Jaynine and Nikki. I'm Lynda Brown, and my mom is originally from Pungnuktuk or Pengnurtung, Nunavut, and my dad's from Montreal. And I was born in what was known then as Frobisher Bay, but now Iqaluit, about 40-some plus years ago, and moved to the south actually when I was 6. So I've been in southern Canada, starting in Edmonton first, and then in Ontario. And I've been in the Ottawa area and connected to the Ottawa Inuit community for the last about 30 years. And it's where I've also learned to become a throat singer and drum dancer and share culture actually with Heidi for the last like 10, 12 years. And yeah, I've been raising my 3 kids here. And Ottawa is such a great place for bringing Inuit culture to a southern community.
Juana, Lynda, for being a part of today's discussion. And last, we have Heidi. Please introduce yourself, Heidi.
My name is Heidi Langell. I am a lifelong urban Inuk. I was born in Ottawa. My dad is from Hebron and Natsiavut and later Nain through the forced relocation. Lynda was very humble. She didn't mention that she was a founding board of directors for the Ottawa Inuit Children's Center, now called Inuit, because we worked on that together. So I was the founding president, and Lynda was a board of director member. Lynda and I have also sat on the board of directors for Inuit Nonprofit Housing Corporation for many years. I've currently resigned, but Lynda's still on there. So she's very, very humble. I have also been a National Aboriginal role model when National Aboriginal Health Organization was still around. And with my husband and I, we are foster parents to Inuit children, working with the Children's Aid Society of Ottawa. And then the immense pleasure of throat singing and doing presentations with Lynda all over North America. So thank you for having me.
Welcome, Heidi, and we're so happy to have you with us today. We'll begin our discussion, and the first set of questions we have for our panelists are about what they've observed in their communities over the past year, including challenges. Panelists, please feel free to answer one of the following questions. You'll have roughly 5 minutes to answer. Question 1, from what you've observed and experienced, what has been the biggest challenge urban Inuit have faced over the past year, and what have you done or seen to adapt to this challenge? Question 2 is, how has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted yourself and your community? And the last question is, how has the recent news of unmarked burials at residential schools impacted you and your community? So I'll ask Nikki to please choose a question.
Okay. So as I had stated, I'm the new executive director for Tumasugit. And one of the challenges that I've seen the Inuit community face is that lack of being able to get out and be around other Inuit and just feel that sense of pride and you know how we just love being around each other. We're a resource center. Our doors we had revolving doors pre-COVID. You know, over 200 Inuit walking through Tumasugit every month. And, you know, so one of the things that we found was our 1-800 helpline was often being used, and our services coordinator was often busy de-escalating, you know, some of the challenges that Inuit were facing, being isolated from other people. So one of the things that, you know, the board of directors for Tumasugit really wanted to find ways to support Inuit during COVID. So one of the ways in which we were able to do that was buy a washer and dryer for our center. Because during COVID, the price of groceries when it first hit last year was super high. And a lot of Inuit that are on income assistance or, you know, making bare minimum, living paycheck to paycheck, you know, and they live in an apartment where you have to pay for laundry. That's the last thing on your mind because groceries were expensive, right? So we wanted to ease that burden a bit. And so one of the ways we did that was by buying a washer and dryer. So we would have, you know, a family of Inuit up to 4 attend the center, you know, wearing all the PPE safety protocols in place, and they were able to do up to 3 loads, or still are able to do up to 3 loads of laundry. And we would hire a taxi. We hired an Inuk to pick up the families, bring them to the center. We provided everything that you needed to do your laundry. But as well, I mean, life doesn't stop because COVID was happening, you know? So you still needed to find a job. You still needed to make appointments. So while they were at the center, we have our computer area. So they were able to, you know, access the internet. But as well, we have our free long distance phone. So as we know, it costs quite a bit of money to call back home. Not a lot of people have even phone service at home. So being able to access the phone to call back home to talk to family members, you know, is essential, as well as keeping in contact. So those were one of the ways that we were able to support the community. And we still are. Another way that we were able to are able to support our community was purchasing a van. And so this van was like, it was a really big purchase, but it was also a very smart one on our part because we wanted to minimize the chances of our families coming into contact with COVID. You know, rather than taking the bus to go to an appointment, they can call us and we would have our driver pick them up and bring them to their appointment. Of course, using all PPE safety protocols. You know, in families that need to move, you know, from one apartment to the next, it costs a lot of money to hire movers. We have a van to be able to help support them help with that, with those kinds of challenges that they might face. So yeah, and then our hamper delivery. So twice a month, we have our driver as well as our hamper coordinator going out delivering hampers and making contact with families twice a month, checking in with them while they're delivering hampers to make sure they're okay if they need support with anything. So, you know, putting all of that in place, wrapped around services so that Inuit wouldn't feel so isolated anymore, and they felt supported during COVID. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Nikki, and it's so great to hear about all the support for Inuit and Inuit families in Winnipeg. We'll move on now to Lynda, your answer for the first set of questions.
Yeah, I'd just like to add on what Nikki was saying, because in Ottawa, very similar. It's one of the greatest things about being in community. It was community gatherings, and we haven't been able to do that. And that's a big part of bringing all generations together, which is, you know, with a lot of funding, it's very, very siloed. So being able to have those community gatherings has been a big deficit. But I think I know for sure here in Ottawa and in Toronto, we've moved kind of into that virtual world and trying to find ways to connect that way. There was country food drop off to community members. The elders here in Ottawa got a whole bunch of equipment so that they were able to get onto Zoom and actually connect with each other, which is really lovely. And grocery cards, because I mean, one of the things I think that COVID's done is there's been all these issues before COVID, and they just got amplified as not being able to do that frontline service in the way that we're used to doing it. But I think that, you know, Inuit are very resourceful and resilient and have found ways to find ways to support that. And I like Zoom vigils for members who passed away, things like that are happening. So I think it's really amazing how people can still come together, one-to-one visits instead of going to the center. We have workers that are going out and meeting clients where they're at. So that also helps, because being in a city, transportation is such a huge, huge issue. And we agree being on the bus isn't necessarily the safest way to get around, especially if you're a single mom with a bunch of kids in tow. That's the last thing you want to do. So yeah, I really see that resiliency to be able to respond in a way that really helps.
Thank you, Lynda. And lastly, we have Heidi for your answers to this first set of questions.
I just want to support everything that Nikki and Lynda has said. The most difficult part has been not being able to gather, especially when there's heartache in the community. We had a few deaths during COVID that normally everybody would come together and support, and we weren't able to in the same way. So just to reiterate everything that they've said community-wise, personally, COVID has impacted our households as it's impacted everybody else's. You know, I've learned that I am not a teacher to elementary school kids, even when it's my own kid. It's not my strength, and that's okay. But one of the things that we did as a family to stay connected to culture is, you know, Lynda and I were still able to do some virtual throat singing performances. I was still able to connect with schools and do some presentations on Inuit culture, and the gift cards and the country food drop off that Lynda was talking about really helped our family. And early on, my family of 6 decided that we were going to have a palauga baking contest and see who can make the best palauga. So I'm doing things like that to stay connected to the culture. The most significant thing is I connected with my niece, who has been reclaiming the Inuit tattoos, and she was able to be a part of my bubble, and I got some of my tattoos. So that really helped my mental health, connecting with culture that way. Nobody's really kind of touched on the third question there, and how has the recent news of unmarked burials at residential schools impacted, you know, ourselves and our community? It's we've known that schools had graveyards. We've known that children have been buried at residential schools. The most amazing thing for me, the one that I've had to sit down and kind of think about, is 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, it would have hit the news and then died away, because there was indifference in this country when it came to Indigenous folks in Canada. And the indifference is really difficult to work with. It's something that people have been working with for a long, long time. But now we're seeing a shift. We're seeing not indifference. We're seeing people care, which it's unfortunate that it had to take children's graves to get to that point. But I do see hope for the future because non-Indigenous Canadians care. And so there's going to be more graves. And it's also a reminder that the residential school system is only one part of what has happened to Indigenous, right? And I'm part of the foster care system, and it's a big system, and it's a very tough system to change. And it's a flawed system, and it's based on the same sort of ideals that the residential schools were built on. So we do have a lot of work to do in the future, and the more allies we have, the more people to help us, the more people that care, the more people that mourn the death of children, will mean that the change will happen maybe in my lifetime, hopefully in my children's lifetime, and we'll see the improvements for our grandchildren. So definitely.
Most definitely, it's inspirational to see yourselves, all of you, as leaders in your communities. And for us in Edmonton, this COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the lack of resources for Inuit who live in the city, and the lack of inclusion in Indigenous organizations that pan-Indigenize Inuit into organizations. And there's lack of support for food security and cultural inclusion. So our Inuit community has been striving and trying to impact a change and kind of go with this ripple effect that's been happening throughout our country. And the recent news of the unmarked burials at residential schools has further further lit the fire for other Indigenous groups in this city to welcome Inuit. And we were lucky to be a part of a organization called Winds of Change that was held in St. Albert at one of the residential schools. And it was impactful for Inuit to showcase a little bit of our culture as well. So as we continue to move with this change in our country and the non-Indigenous allyship that's growing, then we can see further success for Inuit in the South. So in the next section, we're going to talk about culture, staying connected, and what's helped keep us strong and healthy. Once again, panelists, you're welcome to answer any one of these questions. The first one is, how did you maintain or establish a connection to Inuit culture, traditions, and/or practices while living in the South? The second one is, what are ways that urban Inuit community can stay connected with culture while living away from home in the North? And the third one is, what has been an anchor and a source of strength for you and those around you during this time? Once again, I'd like to ask Nikki to go first.
All right. So I had mentioned earlier that I'm in Manitoba, specifically a well-known throat singer. I've been throat singing for as long as I've been living in Winnipeg. And so, I mean, it was 1992, I think it was the year that I moved to Winnipeg, and I was about, I'm going to age myself here, I was about 6 years old. And I came here to live with my aunt because my mom couldn't take care of me. She's, a product of the residential school system and carries a lot of hurt and addictions. And so, she did what she could, or what she thought was the best, was to live with her sister. And so, and there was 3 of my cousins as well, all first cousins, but not biological to our aunt. And And so, my aunt really didn't want us, we're so young, so we don't really understand culture and identity and all that kind of stuff, but we were like little sponges. So we soaked up everything. So that my aunt is the one that really, strived so hard for us to maintain our culture, our language, and our traditions. And so I carried that with me because growing up as well, grew up in the foster care system, the child welfare system as a teenager. And, I lost a bit of who I was and where I came from because there were no services here in Winnipeg for Inuit whatsoever. And so, I lost myself a little bit when I was younger. And then once I started having children, I was about 19 years old and I had my third child already, still in the foster care, in the child welfare system, being supported. And, I really wanted to, find who I was and give that voice to my kids as well, but also to be that voice for other Inuit that lived in the South. So I started throat singing, and that was my way of showcasing a bit of who I was and where I came from, but also to just carry a little bit of who I was for me. And so, the last year, it's been quite hard, being able to showcase a bit of our culture to, common Canadians. One of the things that I've been blessed with is to have daughters of my own. So I've taught both my girls how to throat sing. And so I've had the luxury of teaching them, but also for them teaching me and being able to throat sing with them, on a Saturday evening when, we're watching movies or whatever. Or if I'm scrolling through Facebook and I see another group of throat singers and I'm like, oh my God, that sounds so beautiful. Chastity, Carmelo, let's try this. They'll like roll their eyes and be like, Mom, okay, this is enough. But, and it's, I find it like, even when my daughters are a little bit not liking each other, because how teenage girls are, they sometimes can just get on each other's nerves. I mean, I could say a lot more, but they're just like, yes, okay, so you get it. So, but one thing that I find, and I'm going to start crying because it happens almost every single time, is that as soon as they start throat singing and they have that connection because they're holding each other, they're looking at each other, and they're, connecting with each other. 2 minutes ago, they were not liking each other. And now they're laughing with each other, they're loving each other, they're enjoying themselves. And so I think that's one way that I've been able to really just enjoy that connectivity just with us, is watching my girls throat sing together and just, yeah. I know a lot of you throat singers know, like once you're connected and you start throat singing, it's that connection that just, it's deep rooted. It's within our ancestors, it's in our blood. And it's such a beautiful feeling. And so to do it and to witness it is just such a beautiful thing. Culture is so beautiful. Our culture is amazing.
Thank you, Nikki. That is beautiful. And just a reminder for the first question, I'll go over them again, then I'll ask Lynda to answer. So the first one is, how did you maintain or establish a connection to Inuit culture, traditions, and our practices while living in the South? Or what are ways that the urban Inuit community can stay connected with culture while living away from the North? The last one is, what has been an anchor and a source of strength for you and those around you during this time?
Thanks, Jay. Very similar to Nikki, I would have to say there was an interest for me. Like once we left the North, I felt like I never met other Inuit that weren't relatives. I actually thought that every Inuit was a relative at one point. But in university, I got to meet some Inuit that I was not related to, and it sparked this kind of wanting to learn more about our language, our music, our histories and things like that. And so when I graduated, I moved to Ottawa and joined the Inuit community and started working within the community in our Head Start program, which is geared to preschool kids. And it's all about teaching them their culture and language. And through that process, I got really inspired about learning. We had a wonderful cultural teacher who was from my home community, so I got to learn many things specifically related to being back in Pang. And when I had my first son, who I adopted through traditional adoption, I really wanted to make sure that he always grew up proud of his culture. And so, yeah, same thing. I reached out, learned how to drum dance, learned how to throat sing. My sister and I started a performance group, and I totally hear you, Nikki, because my sister and I could be fighting, but if we start throat singing, suddenly that anger or discomfort with each other seems to dissipate. And it was definitely a way for us to connect. And I've morphed it into more than just throat singing and drum dancing, that there's a lot of cultural storytelling. And Heidi and I both have our kids join us in performances way back when they all went through the Head Start program. And so they were little drummers, like when they were 3 and 4, and throat singing. My daughter, who still uses her Inuit name, so all my kids have an Inuit name and an English name. Both boys decided to go with their English name pretty early on, but my youngest, she's stuck with her Inuit name, Papatsy, and she has she did a show for TVO Kids called Raven's Quest, and she does a 7-minute segment talking about how she learned about Inuit culture all in Ottawa. So anybody wants to check that out, it's a great little segment. So yeah, it's really important to pass it on, and I think that's one of the things I love doing. Is I've taught a lot of youth what I know, and meeting other throat singers anywhere we go, it's always trying to share, do you know this song, do you know this song, and those kind of things. And yeah, I think some of my proudest students are the young girls that did the throat singing for the swearing in ceremony. That all that happened within a couple of days and behind the scenes, but I've known them since they were there in their mom's belly. So it's that sense of community and pride and connection through food and language. Like those things are really, really important too. And I think that we're very fortunate here in Ottawa to have lots of Inuit specific bars that help support that, because I can't imagine trying to get the support maybe in North Bay where there isn't an Inuit center to be able to connect to. But I think COVID has shown a lot of the centers how to support virtually and how to kind of make connections. And I know that's a goal of Tungasugin Inuit here in Ottawa. They've branched out to several different places. And yeah, so I think you can find lots of different resources now online compared to when I first started learning, and thankfully had a good supportive community in teaching.
Thank you, Lynda. Nikki, I just wanted to add that for myself personally, I get a lot of inspiration from my mother, and it's beautiful to see that you as mothers are also passing along those traditions and that love and that nurturing nature that we know Inuit culture is about. And I had the honor to drum dance with my mother recently, so that was a part of her life that was changed and taken away when she attended residential school. But most recently, because I wanted to learn, she has taken the drum and it sparked a new life within her as well. Going into her 70s, she's very enthusiastic now about going out into the community and sharing that joy and that life now with others. So thank you both. And Heidi, please, for your answer for the 3 questions now.
I've been fortunate enough that, I'm gonna age myself here as well, but I've been in the Ottawa Inuit community since there was an Ottawa Inuit community. Since it started in the early 80s, and it was really a federal government drive to help make their Inuit employees feel more comfortable and more successful. And so they funded a place called Inuit House. And Inuit House was a place where Inuit were welcome and can connect with each other and could support each other in the culture shock that was Ottawa in the 1980s. And, that evolved into Tikasavingad Inuit and later the Inuit Center and a Kausavik Inuit Family Health Team and the Inuit Nonprofit Housing Corporation. And so staying connected to an Inuit culture in the South, it started as a place of strength. I remember as a teenager playing softball in an all Inuit league. Right? It was Inuit and their allies playing softball twice a week, and the funding for that, the organization for that, everything for that, it came from a place of strength, and I think that's so important. When I got funding for college, my dad sat me down and had a very serious conversation with me, and I've carried on his lessons, and he said, you know, my sweetheart, he's the only one that can call me sweetheart. He said, sweetheart, I'm the one that went through, you know, residential schools and the forced relocation and tuberculosis treatment, and you are getting your college paid for. He said, don't you dare waste it. And don't you dare become entitled. Ensure that you give back to the Inuit community. And I'm going to cry now because I mean, that has been a lesson that I go back to throughout my adult life, and it's one that I do my best to pass on to my children. Coming from a place of strength when you know, like, it's so difficult nowadays with fiscal responsibility and all the rest of it to apply for funding, because you kind of have to prove that things are bad in order to get the funding. Meanwhile, you're working with a group of people that love laughter and are resilient and need a strength-based approach. Like, you know, if you continuously tell somebody that they're hard done by, then they're hard done by, right? But for Inuit, yeah, we're hard done by, but we've got so many strengths. Oh my goodness, and so much resiliency, and the negotiation of 4 different land claim agreements in the past 40 years, right? Like, those are huge accomplishments for Inuit, and, you know, reminding ourselves of those accomplishments, I find is very important. So maintain or establish a connection in the South. You know, I went to college in Nova Scotia, and that was hard because there's very few Inuit in Nova Scotia, especially when I was there. But we found each other and connected and did what we could. But I did miss the community that is Ottawa, because there is a very strong Inuit community in Ottawa. So after college, we moved back, right? And this is where I'm raising my kids. So maintaining it, it can be difficult, but there's also so many resources out there. It's a matter of knowing where to look, or knowing who to ask of somebody who knows where to look. If you know, can't do it yourself. So and I'm so glad that things are opening up for Inuit across Canada in urban centers. You know, 27%, 28% of Inuit live outside of Inuit Nunangat. And so I'm so glad for folks like Nikki and Jay, who you're doing work across this country, and it's so important. And yeah, so nothing like, thank you for that. And you know, we are fortunate in Ottawa, but let's pass on some of those strengths to whoever wants it.
Thank you, Heidi, for reminding us that yes, we are resilient and our culture is beautiful, and that we need to support Inuit, and it happens just by word of mouth and sharing our knowledge with each other. And so in this final section, we're going to discuss allyship and what it means to support our Northern relatives. So the first question is, from your perspective and experience, what does allyship work look like to you? The second one is, how can Southern communities support urban Inuit living in your city? And what can Southern organizations do to be more Inuit friendly? The third one is, what can schools, communities, or other organizations do to support Inuit youth? And I'll ask Nikki again to go first.
Yeah, so I mean, there's different, what do you call it, avenues, streets, I don't know. There's different ways to look at allyship. So in terms of, I'm just gonna go like a little bit, you know, political to like going down to, you know, grassroots. So, you know, funders that look at our funding proposals, Inuit culture, Inuit traditions, Inuit practice is so much more different than other Indigenous cultures. And so, you know, there's a lot of folks that are non-Indigenous that take a look at our proposals and just kind of, you know, I mean, for years we've been bunched in with under Indigenous umbrella, but I mean, we're different. Our culture is different. The way we speak and the way we do things is different. So I find, you know, there's a small percentage of funders that are seeing that finally, that are giving Inuit a chance to, you know, get funding to do certain things. So I just, for me, hope that, you know, the federal government can work a little bit harder to educate, you know, their employees about culture and how different these cultures are when applying for funding. And then you have, you know, other organizations that I see, you know, across Manitoba that, you know, for a very long time had Inuit dollars within their organization, but weren't really advertising it. Inuit didn't know, you know, if you wanted, let's say, for example, here's an example. So years ago, I went to university. And because I've been living in the South for so long, I couldn't get sponsored from back home because I was living away for, you know, more than 6 months or so. So I needed to look for funding. And so the Indian Education Association here in Manitoba had funding dollars for up to 5 Inuit to attend, or for sponsorship. So I was lucky enough to get those funding dollars to be able to go to university. Now they had up to 5 people that they could, you know, fund Inuit, 5 Inuit, but no one knew about it. And so, you know, the rest of the dollars that was given, you know, where did it go? You know, where is it right now? So perhaps, you know, and these are systems that I'm still learning as a new young executive director for an Inuk organization, is how can I have those conversations with, you know, these organizations to let them know, let us be in care and control of those funding dollars for our people, because we can select and we can, you know, go through those processes. And then there's the schools where, you know, for years and years and years, I've been going to elementary schools and high schools and throat singing and talking a little bit about our culture. But that's, you know, for days that are, you know, they have their Indigenous week, their Spirit Week. And so they're learning about all these cultures. And so, you know, I go in, I bring my daughters with me, and we do a little bit of throat singing, and we talk a little bit about who we are, where we come from, a little bit about where these songs come from, you know, and that's great, and it's beautiful, and it's, you know, we're teaching, you know, even if it is for 15-20 minutes. But the education system really needs to buckle down and start teaching Inuit culture properly. We need to be represented appropriately, and we need to have our own voice. And so I'm really hoping that the education system can really take a look at that and see how they can incorporate us, Inuit. Because you know what? A lot of yous that are watching this, if you're not Indigenous, and even some that are Indigenous, Inuit are Canadians. And a lot of people forget that.
Thank you, Nikki. And we'll move on to Lynda for your answer.
Excellent. Yeah, I've been really fortunate being here in Ottawa and being part of the Inuit Head Start program because, yeah, same thing, constantly having to say, well, that's not true for Inuit. We don't give tobacco to our elders. That's not a protocol that we use, those kind of things, and constantly feel like having to repeat ourselves over and over and over again, especially once, kids that were in our Head Start program and had the cultural supports and the community connections and all that stuff and making their lifelong friends. I know kids who've gone through our Head Start program who are still friends in their 20s because they've grown up together. But once they moved into the big school system, there was a huge gap. So we had started a program. Heidi actually worked at it in the beginning called Bridging the Gap and doing the same thing, going into schools and doing presentations. But there was still a huge gap in what was happening with Inuit kids once they moved into the bigger school system. So in Ontario, quite a few years ago now, they were moving from kindergarten from half-day program to full-day program. And so there were discussions across the province with a Dr. Pascal, and he was, hearing, and he finally came near the end of his scopes to hear the Indigenous Head Start programs. There's 14 different sites here in Ontario. And it was in the circle, he was listening to our concerns. And one of the things I said, I don't understand why we can't run our own kindergarten. We know what to do. We know how to support our kids. I don't see why we can't do it. And he took on to that idea and actually reached out. And within months, we actually had set up the very first Southern Inuit kindergarten program for JKs and SKs. And my daughter actually got to go through the program, and it was amazing to see that they were able to keep that connection, keep learning the language. So not only were they learning English, and they had French classes because that was mandatory as part of the curriculum, they also had Inuit classes, Inuit circles, a lot of the things that they did, all the different play sensories, always had this cultural base, which I think really instilled this pride that made it a bit easier for those kids to move into the bigger school system. But we're still seeing this gap. During COVID, it really became much more noticeable that a lot of our kids were struggling, especially to engage online. Whether or not it was a lack of resources or not understanding that, parents who might have had bad interactions with school systems might not necessarily be as engaged. Those kind of things really became much more apparent during COVID. And our Inuit actually put together a proposal and started a education hub and is supporting Inuit youth in grades 1 through 8 with that same kind of cultural values that our kindergarten and our Head Start program have, to teach them their culture and language in a setting, but also to make sure that they still able to do the curriculum and get the coursework and the credits and things that they need to do to be able to be successful. And, if they need reading supports or one-to-one in order to manage behaviors, those kind of things are definitely provided. And it has spurred on this, okay, now we've got the early years, we've got elementary, next it's post high school, and then there's definitely the post-secondary supports. I know that it's happening all over the place. Trent University, where I went, apparently a lot of Inuit tend to go there. I'm not surprised because it's small, but still close enough to big things. And doing some specific Inuit support. And again, I think we can't highlight this enough that even amongst Inuit, there's differences. And that's one of the things I think being in an urban setting often gets forgotten, is that, here in Ottawa, we're predominantly mostly from Nunavut, but we also have a large population of Nunatsiavut and a few from Nunavik and a few from Nunavut. But I find that also can influence kind of decisions. And so being able to make those, being able to share and bring in different people, I often don't do anything about us without us. So whether it's schools or things, if you're going to teaching the curriculum, bring in Inuk, have them do it. We have presenters that are able to do virtual connection. So there's no excuse now as to why you can't find an Inuk to come in and teach proper curriculum, because that's also been something I'm sure Heidi will touch upon this. What's in curriculum or has been in curriculum, especially when we were growing up, definitely is not representative of what we feel and experience and live. So I think that's my thoughts on the school.
Thank you, Lynda. That reminds me of most recently, the Alberta government was reviewing their education curriculum for K to 6, and there wasn't a lot of Indigenous inclusion in that, and there wasn't any inclusion for Inuit until after the fact of the curriculum being developed. So our hope is that there'll in the future be more understanding of the need to include Inuit in those important conversations about what we feel is information that should be taught to children, and especially if there's Inuit youth in that class, and how that affects Inuit children in school, and how there is a lot of bullying that happens when terms like raw meat eater are used still to this day to define our culture, and how personally that's affected me even, you know, let's say almost 25 years ago when I was in school, and the ripple effects that has for Inuit youth going into higher grades of education, and that in post-secondary education and in institutions, that still the lack of Inuit inclusion in cultural awareness training and cultural awareness courses, and it still needs to be looked at and needs to be revamped, and include Inuit in those. So thank you, Lynda, for bringing up those important points as well. And we'll go on to Heidi now for your answer.
I find that I have so much to say. I have a lot to say. Shout out to Ursula Rudden. It's been a while since we've seen you, but Ursula she wrote a comment, and yeah, we used to work together many years ago at Pukwudit Inuit Women of Canada. So Nakamik, thanks for joining. From my perspective and experience, what does allyship mean? It means not taking space from Inuit. It means you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. We don't expect perfection from anybody. It means relationship building and conversations, and tough conversations. It means recognizing that in this wonderful government system we have, I say wonderful government system, but things tend to be siloed, right? There's the health system, the justice system, the police system, the education system, all of these different systems, and we're working with all of them, so it's exhausting. It can be tiring. So like I personally have worked with the Canadian military, with the Ottawa Hospital, with Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, with countless school boards, with the Ottawa Police Service, and like all of these different systems. So where the education system failed when you went to school, we're working hard to educate allies now. So recognize that, not every Inuk person that you're going to meet is going to be able to do this type of work or education, because it is exhausting, and sometimes there are other priorities. So when you do have the opportunity to work with Inuit, recognize the expertise, recognize that their worldview may be a bit different than yours, and support them however way you can, knowing that you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. Knowing that you're going to be uncomfortable sometimes when some of your psyche is challenged by our experiences, and that's okay, because that's where the growth comes from, right? So being an ally, Lynda and I, when we do some of our throat singing performances and presentations, we often get the audience to try it. And I always say, like, we're getting you to try it so you understand what we're doing, and the difficulty and the fun, because it's fun. But we're not teaching you so you can go ahead and, make a single and get it nominated for an Indigenous Music Award. That's not why we're doing it. There are Inuit all across Canada. And if you have a hard time, if you need somebody Inuk for your event, and you don't know who to contact or who to reach out to, even Inuit in Ottawa know that Nikki is there, right? Or Inuit in Nunavut know where the leaders are in the South. Like again, in Ottawa is a little bit special because we have all of the different national organizations like Pakdidid and ITK and Nunavut Sivinutsavut. But Inuit know where Inuit are, and we know if you can't connect to somebody within your city, we'll connect with somebody outside of your city, and maybe we can tell you. Like Lynda and I know folks in Guelph who are fantastic, right? We know folks in Halifax who are fantastic, and so don't take the space from Inuit. If you know, it might take a little bit of work. It might take reaching out 2 or 3 or 4 times, but no, but that's because we're doing this work every chance we get with every organization we can. And there's only 65,000 Inuit in Canada. There's only so many of us that can do this work. And there's a lot more non-Inuit. So it's going to take time. Anyway, so those are some of my pointers on how to be an ally. Be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Don't take space from Inuit. Recognize that we are doing this work across many different silos. And that kind of thing. So, you know, what can Southern communities do? Listen is always a good way to start, and work with the Inuit organizations that are around, or Inuit organizations that are in other places. But when you do work with folks, know that it takes resources, because you know, I'm currently taking some time off of work in order to do this, but I still need to support my family. So thankfully, this organization is fantastic and recognizes that, but not all organizations are like that. Oftentimes, so often we get asked to do pro bono stuff, which is nice, and we do when we can, but oftentimes we can't, and please understand why, and recognize that. So, I mean, Lynda and I have worked with many nonprofits over the years, and we have what we call a sliding scale. So what can schools, communities do to support? It's basically all the same. Like, listen, get the curriculum right. Oh my goodness, get the curriculum right. Like, you know, how many times Lynda and I you know, FM's mistakes in textbooks, like glaring, obvious mistakes that if they just spoke to one Inuit person, they would realize that that is a mistake. I'll tell you guys a really funny one. It was in Ottawa area, there's 4 school boards, and then in the surrounding area, there's 4 more. Like, we have a lot of school boards, so I won't mention which school board it was, but in their textbook for Inuktitut syllabics, they obviously downloaded the Nunacom font when Nunacom was popular, and they would press A, and then whatever symbol for A was, they showed up, and then they press B, and then that's what they taught their students was the Inuktitut alphabet. It was just like, oh no, that's not like that at all. So I don't know how many students thought that was how they spelled their name, or that's how, like, it was comical. Like, I had to talk to the teachers and like, please stop teaching this page because it's not correct, and you know, send the links to the correct stuff. So when you see, another way to be an ally, I suppose, is there's a thing called media fatigue, and I'm sure you guys all kind of can figure out what it is. But we are going to have more media releases on more bodies of more children in more residential schools. And there is going to be this tendency to be tired and to scroll past it. Please don't, because those are our children. And to us, they were living, breathing human spirits. And for you to scroll past it, I know it's hard and it hurts and it makes your heart heavy. But the more that you are aware of it, the more that you can change, right? When you see news stories, sometimes they need challenging. I don't know how many times I've been interviewed for the newspapers, and then they get it wrong, right? So challenge what you see in the newspapers, challenge what you see on Twitter. There are so many fantastic Inuit to follow on Twitter. challenge what you see on social media, and question some of the things, like what perspective is this news organization representing the story from, and what would that perspective look like if it was somebody else's perspective, right? So critical thinking. So those are, I can talk for a long time on this subject, but those are the, the Coles Notes version of my recommendations. And thank you guys for listening.
Thank you again, Heidi, for sharing your thoughts and perspective on this important discussion. I'd like to share a little bit of some good news that's happened over the past year during this pandemic in the city of Edmonton, and what allyship looks like. And the city of Edmonton established a ward naming committee to rename the wards from ward number 1, ward number 2, and so on and so forth, to traditional Indigenous names. So within their committee, they had Indigenous matriarchs, and they were also enthusiastic about including Inuit elders in that. So an Inuit elder reached out to her home community and family members back home and discussed the importance of what the city of Edmonton is to our Inuit community, and the fact that the Charles Council Hospital is located in what was ward number 12. Brought them to rename the ward to a traditional Inuit word, which is anelnek, and that means the breath of life. So allyship in that example is strong, and it's inclusive, and it's understanding of the history, not hiding from that fact that, there is atrocities that have happened, but how can we show and educate others who live within the city of the importance of inclusion of our elders and our language. So thank you, everybody. And I want to just open it up if there's any of the panelists that would like to add anything else on this last topic. Please feel free to do so.
One more thought, what institutions and things can do to be more supportive, and I think it's really important, is that connection to language. My mom's currently in the hospital, and one of her nurses actually said that she was able to understand my mom because my mom was using the traditional to respond to questions, and her doctor had actually called and said she's not answering. I'm like, is she making facial movements? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, she's answering you. So something as simple as that. I know we've done presentations in all the different hospitals here in Ottawa with different teams, and so that same thing. I think same with Children's Aid. I think there, it's more than just the language. There's the body language and understanding that Inuit read a lot, and sometimes our interactions are different in settings, especially where there's authoritarian figures, and having that kind of understanding that, as a principal talking to a parent, you might be perceived very differently, and you might think that, oh, they're being very agreeable and they're saying yes to everything, but they didn't do anything that I said. Maybe not understanding that, yeah, they were agreeing with you, but they don't actually agree with you. And so you actually have to go a little deeper, those kind of things. So I think having that kind of basic understanding. So if you're an institution that does get a lot of Inuit, like CHIO, we're the hub for children from Nunavut that get sent out. General Hospital, same thing. If you get medevac, you're brought to that hospital. Those hospitals have really made some movement. There's still a lot of work to be done, but they've made some movements and to make sure that is part of it. And I think Aluki mentioned it yesterday with the installation of Mary Simon as our Governor General, that it's great because even though our population is only 65,000, we are everywhere. And for more places to have that understanding about how important our culture and language is, and that they're integrally tied, that better services will come. I know that having a doctor that says "Kanwipit" to my mom will be accepted much, much easier than someone says, "How are you?" So something simple as that can really make a difference in somebody's care, whether they're in school or hospital or children's aid, those kind of things, I think is really important.
Thank you, Lynda. At this point in time, we want to open our discussion to our audience. Please type your questions into the Facebook chat and we'll do our best to answer them. While we're waiting for questions to come in, I'd like to ask our panelists one final question. And what would your message be to Inuit youth who are joining us today? And Nikki, please be the first again. Thank you.
Put me on the spot every time. You know, I too am a foster parent, but to other Indigenous children from Northern Manitoba, and a lot of high-risk girls, youth. I have children of my own that are youth. Tungasugit is, you know, when we were open, had a lot of youth coming in. We're hoping to get funding for a youth program because oftentimes Inuit youth feel like they're not being represented, especially when you're in an urban setting. And I'm speaking specifically Winnipeg. And so, you know, one of the things that I'm really hoping the message get across for our youth is, yes, we are different. Our culture is different, but it's a beautiful culture and we're very beautiful people. And we are so inclusive with other people. And I really hope that you can take that energy and that time to realize how beautiful our culture is. And when our youth program does open here in Winnipeg, come to it. Learn more, teach us more, enjoy that time with your fellow Inuit relatives and friends. And, you know, identity is so important. It's one thing that I wish I had more of when I was a youth. And unfortunately, I didn't have that opportunity. And one of the reasons why I've started Inuit organizations here in Winnipeg was so that there was that spot where you can get together with, you know, other Inuit, because that feeling of identity and being around other Inuit is such a beautiful feeling. And it feels so good, you know, when you're around, sitting around on the floor, eating kwak, makdak, you know, and you're laughing and you're talking, even just being around there, you know, watching it. If you don't eat country food, just being there feels good. So, I mean, just be proud to be who you are. And, you know, even though you may not think that you're teaching other people here in, you know, urban centers, like going to school or whatever, you are, because there's always going to be that one classmate or that one teacher that's going to ask you a question and you're going to answer, and everyone around you just learned something they never knew. So, you know, I just be proud, love who you are, where you're from, and in any chance that you can join an Inuit youth program in any urban setting that you're at, do it. Feel that connection, take on that time to feel that connection with your people. It's so important. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you, Nikki. And Lynda, do you have any comments for youth who might be joining us today?
Absolutely. It's been something I've worked with for forever, and it's something I'm very passionate about. The same thing. I didn't think I really grew up knowing about Inuit culture, but as I've grown more and reflected, I realized my mom had no choice. It's who she was. And I didn't appreciate it until I became a parent myself. And so same thing, I wish that youth are able to find that pride in their culture a lot earlier. Yesterday, I heard someone comment that Mary Simon was successful because she walks in both worlds. And I used to kind of think of myself in the same way, and having a Inuk parent and a non-Inuk parent and trying to navigate. But I've changed my thoughts over the years, and it's not walking in both worlds. It's about making your knowledge and pride of your Inuit culture the source of your strength that makes you be able to weather wherever you are. And that even if you're not able to connect with other Inuit in person, there are other ways to make those connections and connect to communities up north. I think that's another thing that we haven't really touched upon is once you're down south, it doesn't mean that your connection to the north is done. In fact, I think my connection to the north is stronger now than it ever has been because of, wanting to know what's happening up in Peng is much more interest now. So there's opportunities to get connected and use your culture and your pride and those connections as your source of strength to be able to weather the difficulties that do come up and challenges that come living, not just in an urban setting, I think living anywhere, but it's more exasperated when, you have people who refer to you by names that we don't use ourselves anymore or don't understand where you come from or, yeah, I think it's really important. Use our culture as our strength.
Thank you, Lynda. Heidi, what message would you like to send to any Inuit youth who are joining us today?
One of my greatest pet peeves, anytime I hear it, I cringe, I shudder, I rant and rave and vent is, it drives me, I don't even want to say it, but it drives me bonkers. It's when people say like youth are our future, and it just, don't accept that. You're not you as a youth right now, who you are today. You are making an impact. You are an important part of the world. And when people say like you're the future, you're the right now. Thank you very much. And I appreciate the youth view and the youth energy and the youth mindset, and we have so much to learn from you. So don't accept you are our future. You must grow up first. Like, no, like, no. And for organizations that are listening, have youth on your board, have youth on your payroll, and not just a token youth, but somebody that you meet them where they're at and listen to their views, and your mind will be blown by the knowledge that they have. Youth learn so much more, so much faster than we did. And I think that's going to continue. So yeah, youth, you're not, I mean, you are our future, but you are also the right now. And who you are right now is important. And that's my clock, guys. I'm sorry. Oh, it's only going to ring twice. That's good. Yeah, no, you are right now, and you are important, and you are making a difference. And don't forget that. And yeah, like the others said, the connection to your culture, whether you've lived it all your life or you're just connecting now, it's going to be important, and it's going to be beautiful. So that's my. Oh, and I also want to give a shout out to Barry Pottle, who I noticed made a comment. I tried to get Barry to sit on this panel because he is also from Nunatsiavut and has been fantastic and has been part of the Ottawa Inuit community for so long. And I wanted to hear all of his perspectives on these, but unfortunately he wasn't able to. But he was able to join. So shout out Barry Nakamik.
Thank you, panelists, for sharing those important messages for Inuit youth. One audience question that came in is, what is the proper protocol of asking an Inuk to come speak or participate at an event? And what is more appropriate of an offering rather than other cultures providing tobacco for participation? And I'll open this up for anybody to jump in and answer.
I'll take a stab at it. I don't know, I never like the word protocol because it means like a set, first do this, then do this, then do this. But, reach out to an Inuk elder and find out what they would appreciate. I know so many elders who would love tea, but they want red rose tea and not any particular other brand of tea, right? So instead of tobacco, find out what they want. Maybe they just want a gift card to a grocery store and that's what's going to help them the most. And that's what's going to be the most useful. Or maybe they have a collection of Inuit earrings and they would love for you to add to that collection and all of that kind of thing. So there's no set protocols, but it is an understanding that you are valuing their time and valuing their knowledge. So finding out what they would appreciate would be the most appreciated, if that makes any sense.
And it's funny, I often get asked this question as well. How is the proper way to ask an elder, or what is the protocol? And I'm like, well, you know what, we don't have a protocol in this area. There isn't a set of rules that we have to ask us for our knowledge and for our voice. I had a lady in Ottawa, actually, who resides in Ottawa, that really wanted a pair of sealskin mitts from my bio mom. And so, my mom was selling them, and then the lady went and bought a pair. But on the way to my mom, went down to the local fish market and bought Arctic char, because it's really hard to find or to get country food sometimes brought to the south. And her knowing that my mom being an Inuk, and knowing that she liked Arctic char, that's a kind gesture. So my point is, ask these questions. I know it's an uncomfortable question to ask because you've never been faced with it, and there are other cultures that have certain protocols, but this is where we learn. This is where we get out of our comfort zone. This is, and there might be other Inuit that have a different answer every time, but this is how the world becomes a happier place. Just ask.
Thank you. And I'll bring up another audience question. I know that everybody's kind of discussed their views on what allyship looks like, but here's a question that is, what does reconciliation mean to you personally, and also from an organization perspective? So please, if you have any thoughts or your perspective on this, please go ahead and share.
I'll jump in on this one. I think the hard thing is we can't get to reconciliation without the truth, or we're not done with the truth yet. I know most Canadians probably haven't read the 94 recommendations from the TRC, and that's just a starting point, let alone the implementation of those things. So I think reconciliation is seeing more people understand the truth, so that we're not perpetuating the same systematic oppression that we've been experiencing, whether, like Heidi was saying, whether it's injustice or child welfare or the school systems or the hospitals, it doesn't matter where. We're not going to get to reconciliation yet. Like we can't skip that first step, and that those two pieces definitely go together. And I think that's where a lot of non-Indigenous people have a struggle, that they're, okay, I think I've heard about this. I know, what else can I do? And I think we're still in a learning and learning phase and working together. And so I see huge changes, especially from, just within the last 5 years. I would say there's been a definitely shift among Canadians to kind of get more of the truth, so that we can work towards reconciliation. But yeah, I definitely say we're definitely not there yet.
Thank you.
Sorry, Jay. Lynda took the words out of my mouth. Broad use of the word reconciliation without the truth, it means we're just going to be going through a cycle, right? And I see this cycle now. If Canadians are tired of the apologies that they've been hearing, about the residential school system, or about the tuberculosis treatment, or about the forced relocation, well, let's do the work now so we don't have to apologize 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road. And that work now means that we need to change the child welfare system. It is not acceptable, the amount of Indigenous, and Indigenous is the overall, Inuit, First Nations, and Métis. It's not acceptable that we have so many Inuit kids in the care of Children's Aid Society. It's not acceptable that we have so many First Nations and Métis children in the care of Children's Aid Societies. It's not okay what our justice system looks like. So we got to learn the truth first, as Lynda said, before the reconciliation comes. The most basic and easy thing that you can do for the truth and reconciliation is to read the Truth and Reconciliation Report and the 94 calls to action. But understand that that is only one piece of the pie. Residential schools is only one piece. There are so many other pieces, but that is the most basic thing that you can do to start, for sure.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have to end our conversation here. For those who had questions we were not able to get to, the NCTR will be hosting the video as well as a blog with all questions answered by our panelists. On behalf of the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, I would like to thank Nikki Komaksiutiksak, Lynda Brown, and Heidi Langell for joining us today. And thank you to our audience for joining us. Watch for news on our next NCTR dialogue happening in August, which will be a discussion on treaties. We hope to see you there.